What's going on, guys? It's your boy Anthony back with another edition of the Fourth Man. Happy February to everybody. I hope everyone's 2022 is continuing to get off on the right foot as we progress through this long Big Three offseason. We got a great episode for you coming up. Dope interview with a recurring guest on the back end. But first, we got to talk some Big Three. Big news. We have a start date to the season this summer. Season 5 is officially a countdown away from getting going. So we're going to talk about all that on this episode before we get into the interview. First and foremost, if you want to find the show and continue listening for any Big Three offseason updates or any news on new players and speculation, if you want to find the show on social media, it's at Fourth Man Pod. That's Instagram, that's Twitter, and just doing a little bit more of a social aspect to it. It's not all podcast related, and become a little bit more of a news page, a highlight page. So make sure you're following, especially on the Instagram front. But once the season starts, make sure you're following on Twitter as well. If you want to watch the show, you prefer a little bit of a visual on the podcast, you can find us youtube.com/fourthmanpod. Mentioning this in the last episode, haven't created it yet, but I have a cool little series coming up before we get into some of the players that are joining. Kind of going to speculate on a few, whether it's realistic, maybe I just want to see, or some young players. So continue to follow along, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Those will be dropping very, very soon, hopefully with some cool content in the summer as well. And for those of you listening on Dash Radio and the Nothing But Net channel, we appreciate you guys, as always, listening on a Saturday. We appreciate Dash for continuing to give us a platform to talk more about the Big Three. Okay, I mentioned Big Three as a start date. Yes, that's right. Season 5 will begin June 18th, 2022. So that leaves us with about 4 months here. So 4 months and some change. So the season is quickly coming along. And look, this could be one of the more wild off seasons that we've had in recent years in the Big Three. Typically, we know that at least 2 teams are going to come back somewhat full strength. We know for the most part that captains are going to come back. But I feel like this year it's a little bit different, because let's just start, with our championship team trilogy. I mean, think about who runs the show on trilogy. We got Jarrett Jack, who's a coach for the Phoenix Suns. I'm sure he can still ball, but, I don't know how much more involved or how much more he's getting into the coaching side. Will he still return? Amir Johnson, playing for G League Ignite, taking on a little bit more of a mentorship role. Again, a guy he's still playing, but, I feel like maybe there's a little bit more question marks than there's been in recent years. I could be completely off here. Olive Trilogy could return. Isaiah Briscoe's balling out right now in the G League. He could have an NBA opportunity by that time. But again, this is me all just speculating, me just wondering. Three-Headed Monsters seems to run it back every year. They're probably been getting ready since the season ended, trying to finally capture that championship after being the only team to get to the playoffs in all 4 of the Big Three seasons. But just a little speculation there. I don't know. I think it could be one of those off seasons where there could be a lot of changes, whether it's just in the league as a whole. That this is one of the most innovative leagues in all of sports, and that Ice Cube is going to bring something new to the game more than likely. So it's going to be an interesting off season. And like I said, if you're not subscribed on YouTube yet, make sure to subscribe if you're into like free agency news, or in this case, it's more of like addition news or who's going to join the draft news when it comes to the Big Three stuff. A lot of good stuff coming on the way, but the season starts June 18th. So at this point, we're just kind of counting down, waiting for a few splash alerts to come along. And I think we're really gearing up for a dope off season, but even a greater season. And I know that for the past few years, we've been saying that time and time again, new season, obviously is going to be better than the last one. That's always the goal. But I think as this thing kind of like cranks back up following the year off, I think we're going to see some continuity, some exciting changes, some different players in the field. And I think all of that's going to lead to another really successful, fun season this summer in the Big Three. Who knows? Maybe they'll go back on tour. I don't know if the plan is to keep playing in Vegas for the majority of the time, or try to get more on that tour run that they were doing the first couple of years before COVID. But that'd be cool if they could do that in a little bit more of a limited capacity again a little bit more than they did last year when I know they went to Dallas, Milwaukee, Chicago, but if they could tour a few more cities, I think that'd be dope as well. That's most of the news I have from a Big Three standpoint. The other news is that it's always just great to see Monster Energy actually just renewed their partnership with the Big Three. So it's always good to see big name partners continuing to believe in the league and want to continue to do business with them. I think that's a positive sign as well. Also, I feel like, we'll touch on this more on the back end when we do our interview with Jeff Kee, who is formerly known as Jeff Kee from G League TV, but now we can also say Jeff Kee from the G League. So we're going to talk to him a little bit about his new career in the G, the transition from G League TV, and just kind of his new role, and talk also about some of the Big Three guys that have been playing in the G League as well, and kind of the similar pathways, or I guess similar ties that the G League and the Big Three have together. So we appreciate everyone who's tuning in on this episode. Again, make sure you're following on all social media platforms and subscribing on YouTube. Again, the season starts June 18th. I'm sure that will come up more than on multiple occasions, whether it's on the Fourth Man page or on the Big Three page, but you will see that number a lot. Hopefully we'll get a countdown going soon. Appreciate everyone who's tuning in, and let's get to our interview with G League's Jeff Kee. Jeff, my guy, welcome back to the show. You are now the most decorated guest on the Fourth Man podcast. So appreciate you taking the time again. We always appreciate your expertise with really players that don't have a lot of prominence to their name necessarily, but in the Big Three, it's all about your game and not your name. So appreciate you joining the show today. And how's everything going?
Anthony, I appreciate you having me back, man. Yeah, a lot has changed since I was first on the show. I remember the last time I was on was for the Big Three draft, and
Right.
we looked at the draft, and it was crazy because half of those guys were either current G League guys a lot of them are still playing in the league, or former G League guys. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, it's been a really fun last few months. I kind of switched over from doing G League TV to now working for the G League over the past few months since November. So that's been a lot of fun, and it's just kind of been a real enjoyable ride going from like different G League games and watching these guys play. I was in Vegas for a couple of weeks and watching the showcase, and so it's been really awesome.
Man, that's so cool. I want to reflect back on the draft a little bit because you made a lot of interesting points and where some of the players are at today that you discussed. It's pretty wild. Like, I feel like we should have listened to your knowledge of the players a little bit more and made some of our predictions that way. But I want to tie that back in. But yeah, like you said, a lot has changed. You're now with G League, kind of hands off with G League TV a little bit more. How has the role been? What's kind of been the change like getting adjusted to working in the G League and getting to see guys like LiAngelo Ballway in an in-person spectacle?
Yeah, it's been really cool. When I was running G League TV, it was kind of like any good performance I would post, so I was over at night. I remember every night I would basically post like 10 to 15 of the best performances every day. Whereas on the G League, we're a little bit more calculated with what we post and when we post it and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff is prepared in advance, and there's a lot of stuff that we do with like sponsors and stuff like that as well. So it's a little bit more thoughtful and planned out. Whereas with G League TV, I remember I was just posting like all the good highlights, just making sure that everyone was getting covered. But it's been really cool, with now helping with the D League social and digital side. I'm also on the G League show, which has been really awesome. So it first started with me actually working behind the scenes on the show. And
Okay.
then just out of the blue, one of the co-hosts asked if I could replace him for one show. It was just for one show because he had an emergency to take care of. And so I was like, sure. It was kind of last minute notice. And just so happens that show, we were interviewing Isaiah Thomas, right?
No
Because, he
way.
went to the Grand Rapids Gold for one game. And so it was the day he was going to make his G League debut. And I was freaking out because I was like, oh my God, I get to interview him a couple hours before the game. And we interviewed him. It went great. I was on that show that one time, and the show went well. And to tell you the truth, I was hoping that I would come back, right? I don't know
Yeah,
if it was a guest appearance or whatever the case may
definitely.
be, but they ended up just making me the third person on the show. It's myself and Gianna Hearn, who used to work for the Reno Bighorns as a reporter, and then Dom 2K, who's really popular
Oh,
on
nice.
Twitter and YouTube. And so we all do the show. It's every Wednesday, so that's been awesome, kind of transforming from behind the scenes to on the camera.
Man, that's so cool. And I think it just goes to show like all the hours of you watching the league and really being invested in it before you even work there is like it literally pays off as soon as you walk through the door. So that's so cool.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. That is one thing that I never knew what the end goal was, in the sense
Yeah.
where I would consume like hours and hours of G League content, back before I was working for the league and I was going to all these games and reading up on all the articles and all the latest news. And I was always thinking to myself, I wonder, I have all this information in my head. I wonder what I'm going to use it for. So it's been good. So because I can kind of reflect some of that knowledge onto the show.
From a professional level, it seems like the transition has gone pretty smoothly. But I want to also ask from even more of a personal level that you have with some of the players, because a lot of players really appreciate and engage with the G League TV page in the past. Now you're seeing these guys play in person. What has that relationship been like? Kind of seeing these guys in person and be like, hey, we're both kind of like building ourselves up together and trying to, make it to like this ultimate, peak goal.
Yeah, that's been probably the coolest part, is because a lot of these players I had talked to for the last 2 years through DMs. Every time a lot of them had good games, they'd be like, "Oh, you see my 20-point game?" I'm like, "Yeah, bro, I saw it. I'll post it." And
Yeah.
so for about a year and a half, 2 years, I've been communicating with a lot of these guys through DMs, and a lot of them are still on that grind of they're in the G League. They might have gotten a 10-day or so. They might have gotten
Yeah.
a two-way contract, but they're still grinding for that full-time NBA deal. So
Right.
it's been cool seeing them, because now I go to games all the time. I used to go to games before, but last year was the bubble. So I couldn't go to
Oh,
any
that's right.
games. And so I
Hmm.
was just, really communicating through these guys, either through text or through DM. But now it's cool because when I go to the games, I can introduce myself and say, you and I have talked so many times through DMs, but I finally get to meet you. So that's been cool too, to see kind of the progression. And a lot of these guys, like I said, they're still grinding for that one shot in the league. A lot of
Hmm.
them have gotten it because this year we had over 100 call-ups to the NBA.
Amazing.
But there are so many other G League guys. I always say this year is the best year to be a G League player and the worst year to be a G League player, because, like I said, 100+ guys have gotten called up to the league, whether it's a 10-day, a two-way, whatever the case may be. They've gotten to live their dream out. But then it's weird, because if you're a G Leaguer and you didn't get that call up, you have to feel a certain way about it, because everyone else, and you saw some of your teammates getting that opportunity in the league.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because like you only think of the positive side of like, oh wow, 100 call-ups, like so many people got opportunities, but there's so many more players which I've seen, posted or even watching the G League. I watch the G League a little bit more now just for that reason, of like your page and like just how like much it's grown. It's so weird. Like there's so many more players that are still like haven't got that chance that probably should have at least one shot to like prove themselves because of their play in the G League. And that leads into like an interesting segue to like my next question, is really just around how like legitimized was the G League as like a viable option this year? We've seen so many players from experienced veterans to guys overseas to guys in the big three, like now come through the G League in hopes of getting their NBA chance. So how like legitimized do you feel like the G League got within the year, or maybe even the past couple of years in the bubble as well?
Yeah, I think it's more legitimate and more mainstream than ever now. And so I really think that everybody who has is on the cusp of the NBA, whether they're playing overseas, whether they're playing in the big three, is has to be thinking to themselves, I need to utilize, or I could utilize the G League to get myself in the league, either for the first time or get back in the league again. And to tell you the truth, a few years ago, that wasn't necessarily the case. I
Mm-hmm.
remember it was 2016 when Nate Robinson signed with the Delaware 87ers, and he had been out of the league for a while. He had kind of been on the kick that Isaiah Thomas has been on recently, where he's like, I
Mm.
just want to play. I just want to play. Just want any opportunity. And so Nate Robinson had been promoting himself online a bunch, saying that he's willing to do anything, just wants to hoop again. So he actually took the G League route when it wasn't really popular to do so.
Right.
And a lot of people criticized him for it and were like, man, if you're going to the G League, you're basically dead in the water. You know what I mean? You're going to the G League. That means
Mhm.
that you're washed, but we don't look at it the same. And I think the public doesn't look at it the same as they did in the past, right? Before, it was seen as a negative thing, that's where you go when your career is on the tail end and you are desperate, right? Now it's like, okay, I've been out of the league. Things didn't go my way. I'm going to use the G League to get myself back in the public eye, right? Play well and get myself back in the league. And I think that it's now the most viable option to get back in the NBA, and the
Yeah.
players are starting to realize that. And also the public is starting to realize that too, because they used to look at it as a little bit of as a joke, unfortunately, but it's really done a total 180 on that.
Yeah, there's so much exposure now. There's obviously they play on ESPN, ESPN Plus a little bit more, which with so many streaming options, it's such like a realistic thing for multiple people to have ESPN Plus and watch that. But I just love the attention it's getting, and that veterans aren't afraid to take that route anymore because of what other people think. Like it seems like a really legitimate option, a strong option, like almost like the next step to getting to the NBA at this point. Whereas
Right.
like you mentioned, like a few years ago, maybe it was like third, fourth, fifth option before that's like a real NBA shot.
Definitely. And I think the biggest thing now too is that a lot of teams are also sending their lottery picks to the G League.
Yeah.
Their first rounders to the G League. It's crazy. A few years ago, if you were a first rounder, if you were a top 10, top 15 pick and during your rookie year you were in the G League, they would automatically characterize you as a bust, right?
Uh-huh.
Even
Uh-huh.
though it was still early on, even though these guys are 19, 20 years old. Now it's pretty normal to see a top 10, top 15, top 20 pick in the G League, whether it's for, maybe a couple weeks, a couple months, because these guys are so young. And I think people are starting to realize, hey, listen, it's going to take these guys time to develop. And
Hmm.
the best place for them to develop is the G League, because they'll play 35 minutes, they'll play 40 minutes. They'll get all the reps, all the touches they need. Whereas if they were just sitting on the bench in the NBA, we're talking about 5 minutes of garbage time. So,
Yeah.
having guys like Kuminga back in the G League this year, Moses Moody in the G League for the first time. Josh Christopher was with the G League with the Rio Grande Valley Vipers for a little bit too. We're seeing all these first rounders in the G, and I think that's awesome because that is also adding legitimacy to it too, right?
Hmm.
It's not just guys who are looking to go back into the league. It's also guys who are really looked upon as the future generation of the NBA, and they're using the G League to get better, to improve until their time is ready to go to the NBA and make a difference.
What's been cool too is I feel like that development process is almost speeding up in a sense. Like I feel like you see like the early results from guys being in the G League then going to the NBA. Like maybe not the greatest example in comparison to some of those guys you mentioned that went higher in the draft, but like someone I saw the other night was Trey Mann, who I feel like has been playing for the OKC Blue a lot. He put up like
Right.
29 points the other night
Yep.
and
Yep.
their overtime win against the Mavericks. And I feel like I was like, why is Trey Mann? I mean, I think OKC has so many prospects at this point that they're like, just anybody who's not playing, just send them to the blue, and we'll get them up here eventually, like because there are so many guys that need to play. But it's interesting because like I feel like maybe Trey Mann wasn't necessarily ready to come out the gates and play in there, but after like getting his feet wet a little bit and playing in the G League against now not just like young competition, but just like experienced NBA veteran competition as well, like you see like the benefits of that like so early on.
Yeah, and because there's so many former NBA players and first rounders in the G League this year, the competition level has never been higher, right?
Yeah.
So on a nightly basis, you're looking at G League teams and being like, wow, just a few years ago, half of these guys could have been on NBA rosters or would have been, or I'm sorry, or were on NBA rosters, right? And so it's really crazy to look at. If you look at the Agua Caliente Clippers, Chris Dunn is playing for them now, right? Chris Dunn was
Wild.
what, the fourth pick back in 2017?
Yeah.
I
Not
mean,
that
just a
long
few
ago.
years ago, yeah, he was considered an NBA ready prospect coming out of Providence, right? And now he's in the G League. You look at the Grand Rapids Gold. I mean, throughout this year, they've had Mario Chalmers, who they still have, Kenneth Reed, right? Lance Stevenson, Nick Stauskas, Shabazz Muhammad,
Yeah, I
right?
was
So
just
they had all these veterans on the team, and these guys are like,
first round
wow, these
picks.
guys were impactful players in the league. Shabazz Muhammad for a while was a double-digit scorer in the league, and we've seen Lance what he's been doing in Indiana. He had those 4 10-day contracts, and they just signed him to
Hmm.
for the rest of the season. So yeah, more than ever, the talent in the G League resembles the talent in the NBA.
I think Kenneth Farid's playing there too now, right? So that's just
Yeah,
like
Farid is there now too, right?
another guy to add
Right.
there, which is crazy. Like I kind of
And
like
Tarek
that.
Black.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, Tarek Black's on there too.
What in the world? See, I think that's pretty cool. And I think I like the strategy of Grand Rapids Gold because it's like they're a contender, right? They're the affiliate of a contender in the Denver Nuggets. So it's like, why not have some veterans play in our G League affiliate? And then when we need them, we can call them up. It's like they're already directly tied to us, so we can call them up quickly and get them on our roster. And they're at least familiar with the organization, I think. So I think that's a good strategy by Denver. I'm curious to know. Obviously, we have the G League Ignite team, which is usually full of like a couple veterans, and then obviously like some high recruits that decide to go there instead of the college route. I'm curious to know, like, do you ever think that there'll be like a NBA veteran G League team, like just the opposite
That's
version of it?
That's a really good point. I never thought about that, but that would be really interesting to take Mario Chalmers, take Kenneth Fareed, maybe even IT if he, were to come back. Maybe even Chris Dunn. He might be a little bit too young, but he considered a veteran, I guess. And put Denzel Valentine. He's playing for the Maine Celtics right
Oh,
now.
another
Put
one.
them all in a team, right? These are considered the NBA, I don't know what you would consider, but NBA alum squad, essentially, right? And have them compete. That would be so interesting. I'm really curious as because I know that when the Ignite team comes to town, all the
Mhm.
teams give their best effort because they're like, this is the next branch of prospects. All these guys are going to be first round picks. A lot of them will be top 10, top 15 picks, right? So teams are always giving them their best shot. I think the same thing would happen for this team. They'd be like, even though Kenneth Freed's in his 30s, Chalmers in his 30s, Denzel Valentine late 20s, right?
Yeah.
These guys can still hoop at a really, really high level. You'd get an unbelievable amount of competition between those games. And I think people would certainly tune in if there was an all NBA team. That's a point that I don't think has ever been brought up, but that'd be interesting to see.
Well, my mind always shifts to the big three. So I'm always like, how can we form a team out of like, a group of people that used to play together, or like a group of
Right.
people, kind of like, I guess, like the tournament style in a sense. But you brought up a couple of veterans, and I kind of want to talk about some of the guys in transition to tie this into the big three, because we've seen a lot of guys get their opportunities. So in the past, in the big three, we've seen a few guys like here and there get like NBA opportunities. But what I really liked about this season is that a lot of guys got opportunities in the G League, which ultimately a couple of them led to playing in the NBA. You mentioned Chalmers. I know Joe didn't take the G League to NBA route, but he got a 10-day in the NBA. But a lot of guys got that G League opportunity, which at this point feels like it's that next best option to the NBA, or like the route to get to the NBA the quickest. So Kevin Murphy, who is playing for Ignite,
Yep.
Isaiah Briscoe, Iowa Wolves, mentioned Chalmers, Jodie Meeks is another vet, Harry Jones, a couple of vets. But what are your thoughts on guys like, I guess, like veterans playing in the G League and coming from like maybe an overseas route, or coming somewhere from like the big three and joining some of these young guys?
Yeah, it's hard. It's definitely hard because the thing is that the G League is looking to develop younger talent first, right?
Exactly. Uh-huh.
And if you're an older player, if like for example Perry Jones, he's not really getting that much run in Windy City right now.
Yeah.
And he's still a really good player, but Windy City is trying to develop Daniel Oturu first, right? They're trying to develop a lot, not only Windy City, but if you look at Grand
G League
Rapids too,
Ignite.
right? The
Or
Ignite, or yeah, look at Ignite. They're trying to develop Jaden Hardy first. They're trying to develop Scoot Henderson first. They're not
uh-huh.
really as concerned with Kevin, right? Even though Kevin's playing well and he started games as too. They're looking for them to get touches, and for them, all the scouts who come out to the games are looking to see them play first, right? And so it's kind of weird when you're a veteran coming to the G League, especially if it's mid-season, because you got to think the young guys always come first. The two ways, right? They matter,
Yeah.
right? The
Mm-hmm.
exhibit 10s, they matter. The assignment players, they matter. So you fall in line with that. So if anything, you're kind of fourth on that list of players that would get touches or get minutes. Chalmers still offers a ton to the court,
Yeah.
right? So he's still a really good on-ball defender. He can still shoot at a high level, even though he's been missing a lot of his open threes this year. But he still offers a good amount to a team, which is the reason why he plays. But guys like Perry, or even at the beginning of the year, Tarek Black, it's always weird because they can still hoop at a high level. I don't always know that the G League is the best route to take, because I think it was recently I saw Justin Detman.
Uh-huh.
He tweeted something along the lines of, should I go back to the G League?
Yeah.
And he's a former G League MVP back when it was the D League, you
Uh-huh.
know. But I was thinking Justin can still score his tail off. I watch him in TBT every year. He gets 20 plus. When he was with the Texas Legends a few years ago. He averaged 26 points a game, and that was back in like 2018, right?
Yeah,
He
he
can
just
still
helped
hoop.
Tri-State become a #1 seed in the Big Three in like
Right,
4 or 5 games.
right. And so, but it's weird because he'd come back to the G League, and I think a lot of these players are expecting, hey, listen, I have NBA experience. I've been a G League MVP before. I've played high level overseas. I'm expecting to play right away, but that's not going to be the case, right? If he were to come back, let's say he comes back for the Texas Legends, they're looking at Carlik Jones is going to get all the minutes, right,
Yeah.
at the point position. And so it develops a really weird dynamic because the veteran can still hoop, but they've got to realize the parent club is not really looking to give them a ton of minutes. They're trying to develop these young guys who they know are going to be in their roster, if not long term, at least for the next couple years. So
Yeah, that creates.
it's a tough route.
Yeah, it's just an interesting thought because again, like kind of reflecting on Grand Rapids, it feels like they're more like, let's get NBA ready players now. Like, we just saw the whole thing with like Bol and Fold, and it almost seemed like he was up and down. They never really cared to develop him that much. He almost seemed like a trade asset for a while, and they would just develop him in house whenever they could. And we talked a little bit about how like they have so many veterans on their team. Do you feel like there's maybe just good spots in the G League right now that like that players should go to, or guys in the Big Three that play and have a good season would benefit more from? Because it seems like Ignite might be a tough spot, right? You say Kevin Murphy starting, or like Windy City. Isaiah Briscoe's young, so maybe that just works out for him. But
Yeah.
do you feel like there's like good spots outside of like Grand Rapids that might be good for him?
For veterans, you mean?
Yeah, just for veterans in general. Like, do
Yeah,
you
Grand
feel?
Rapids was certainly number one. I would say Capital City they've used Greg Monroe pretty well, right?
Uh-huh.
And so he's a guy he can still produce at such a high level though. The Sioux Falls Skyforce, they had Brandon Knight this year, so they had
Mm-hmm.
him, and then they have a couple other veterans, and so yeah, it's really tough. I think it just depends on the situation. Like
Yeah.
guys are getting called up in and out of the league, and then with the G League there's a lot of turnover, right? So you can have a player here one day, and then for whatever reason they're mad they're not getting playing time. They ask out of their contract, they go overseas, right? Um, and then you have
Mm-hmm.
guys who are playing well, might get the call up, might just stick with the NBA franchise, so a team has to pick up a guy or two. So it just depends on the situation. It seems to me that Grand Rapids is the team out of all of them that has just been willing to, if you can ball, you can ball, and they're willing to
Yeah.
sign you and play you, not depending on if you're young or old, but just can you hoop, right? Can you produce? And I like that strategy more, but I can totally understand why teams would be against that, right? There have been a lot of teams this year that haven't signed really any veterans, right? And that's because they're focused, and I think it has to do a lot with the parent club. The parent
Mm-hmm.
club is focused on developing the young guys first and them getting their touches. Because to tell you the truth, a lot of teams in the G League aren't concerned with necessarily winning games and winning championships, right? It's
Interesting.
just more about
Okay.
yeah, it's just more about helping the parent club develop the young guys that still need a lot of work, right? And whether you lose in the process or win in the process, I mean, of course, it's better if you win, but if you lose the games, that's not really the end result, right? That they're looking for. They're looking for, are these players getting better?
That's a good point. And kind of thinking about Grand Rapids now, I'm wondering if they have maybe guys that can just hoop, like they're just looking for anybody because they've gotten rid of so many like first round picks, or maybe just picks in general to trade for assets that would help their team now win rather than later. So maybe that's another reason they just pick up anybody.
Could be,
But
yeah, could be.
that's an interesting point too. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So kind of just going back to some of the players that in the league that went from the Big Three to the G League. I mentioned a few: Murphy, Briscoe, Chalmers, Meeks. Amir Johnson's there, but not really like playing much. It
He's
seems
more of
like
a coach now, actually.
yeah. Perry Jones and Earl Clark were a couple others too.
Yep.
Out of that list, is there any guy that's like really impressed you with their play when they have had the time or gotten the time to play?
Yeah, I would say Jodie Meeks. Tell you the
Mm-hmm.
truth, Jodie Meeks, the thing about him is that every team could utilize a guy of Jodie Meeks' caliber because he can do what a lot of players can't, and that's just score without the ball in his hands, right? Well, score without being a ball dominant type of player, right? So
Sure.
if you have a really good point guard who can distribute, or you have a center that really draws in a lot of defenders, having a Jodie Meeks on the floor is perfect for all 30 NBA teams. It's been perfect for the Raptors on 05 because give this guy an inch of space and he can still knock it down like he did a few years ago when he was with the Raptors and
Hmm.
the Wizards and the Lakers. So a guy like him, I could actually see back in the league just because he's one of those specialty players, right? And every team needs a catch and shoot type of guy. But he's impressed me. I've in spurts been impressed by Mario Chalmers, right? Because I don't think
Yeah,
that he's really lost much of a step. It's just that he's been really streaky with his shot,
I've
and I know
noticed
he's
that
got to be
too.
frustrated seeing that.
Is that
Say it again.
I've noticed that too, just a little bit, and that's more me like just like stat watching. So I'm not going to really take that much into consideration. Like you pull up the stats and be like, oh, he didn't shoot very well today, but I'm not really watching the game, so I don't know what the outcome is. Do you feel like a lot of that has to do with maybe just trying to establish himself a little bit more in the league in order to get back to the
Yeah,
NBA
I don't know
quicker?
because he's still like if you watch him play, he looks like he did it on Miami, right? He moves the
Hmm.
same. He still defends on ball at a high level. He still generates good looks, right? They're just
Hmm.
not falling for him. And a guy like him, I know, can just go into a gym and make 85 out of 100 threes. So
100%.
it's kind of I always cringe a little bit when I see him on the box score and he's like 2 for 9 from three because I know that he could stand in that same spot in an open gym and probably make all 9, all 10, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. For a guy like him, he might just be going through a little slump, which is unfortunate. But it doesn't look like to me he's lost too much. Oh, another guy I didn't mention that wasn't a big three guy is Gerald Green's back in the G League.
Yeah.
He's playing for the Vipers now, and
Someone
so
that Ice Cube I think was looking into
yeah,
adding to
yeah.
the big three.
That would have been cool. And I could see him as a big three guy. It's been really cool to see him in the G League because I was thinking, well, first off, over the summer, he was looking to make an NBA comeback. He worked out with the
Hmm.
Rockets. I remember hearing something that he might have worked out with the Mavericks. Don't quote me on that, but I
Okay.
think he worked out with a couple teams. And, I don't think he drew that much interest at the time. I saw reports that he was killing these Rockets players in practice, right? And he's got to be thinking to
Uh-huh.
himself, man, I can still go, right? I
Yeah.
can still go at a high level. And I love that he's utilizing the G League too, because he's just another name that draws a lot of people to the G League. Anytime these old veterans come back, they bring a little bit of a star power with them, right?
For
Joe
sure.
Green, having won the dunk contest, having been one of the best dunkers of all time. If you're a Heat fan, right, and you like Mario Chalmers back in the day, you're going to watch some of the Skyforce games, or
Definitely.
maybe if you're a Nuggets fan, you'll watch Grand Rapids Gold play. Same with Greg Monroe. If you're a Pistons fan, maybe you'll watch him. So having these veterans has drawn a lot of eyes to the G League that otherwise we wouldn't have. And so, but Gerald's been big because he's he's another guy. He struggled with the shot a little bit, but can still score at a really high level, moves so well. And every once in a while he'll flash the hops that he had. And it's like, man, this guy's like 34 years old, still jumping like that. He's probably a guy that at 50 can still do a windmill
For
and still
sure. I
do it under
mean,
the leg.
yeah, I mean, shooting's one thing, but when you still have like crazy bounce like that, it's just insane. So yeah, I feel
Yeah.
like at this point, Gerald Green's just not going to lose any much of that bounce. It doesn't matter how old he is. But it's been cool to see his like return back to just playing because it makes you like, watching. So big James Harden fan, I am. Watch a lot of Rockets games. So I watched a lot of Gerald Green play, and it just seemed like he was such an impactful player and rotation player for them at that time, like fit perfectly next to Harden. It's kind of a surprise just to see him even go into coaching because he wasn't getting the opportunity. So I'm really happy that he's getting a chance to play and probably deserves maybe a call up. It seems like at this point, Houston might not be the best fit because they are developing players, but it would be
Right.
cool to see him back in the league, with the contender.
You know, Thinking about Gerald Green, it makes me feel for a lot of the guys in the G League because Gerald Green goes to the G League, right? All of a
Mhm.
sudden, there's a ton of hype and people are tuning in to watch the Vipers play, right? And the 3 games that he has played so far, he scored 20 plus in each game. So he's been
It's
balling
nuts.
out. I always feel bad when a guy has been in the G League for years. Some of these guys have been in the G League 4 or 5 years
Mhm.
looking for that one call up and playing well too, which is the reason why they always come back in hopes that they're getting their one opportunity. And then a guy like Gerald Green or Isaiah Thomas come along and they play 2, 3, 4 games, right? There's all this hype around them, and then a team calls them up, right? Where
Yeah.
a guy on his same team might have been in the same grind for 5 years, right? Not just 5 games, and doesn't get the call up. So I'm always torn with that because although I want to see him succeed and get back to the league, I would rather see some of these other vets who haven't gotten their chance yet just get their 110 day.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, it was so awesome during that month span when all these guys were getting their call-ups because, like I said, so many of them
It's like
had
so many
been in
people
the
you've
G League.
covered and like try to put on notice. It's just like
Exactly,
called
exactly.
up,
And
called
some of
up,
them,
called up.
right, some of them were not guys that you would have expected, right? Of course, if you're getting 20 something a game, you're going to get called up, right? If you were, getting 13, 14 rebounds a game, you're going to get the call up,
Mhm.
Some of these guys were getting 9, 10 points a game, right? But they impact the game in so many ways that aren't seen on the stat sheet. One my favorite is a guy named Craig Sword who is playing for the
Oh yeah.
Capital City Go-Go right now and got called up on a 10-day to the Wizards. 4 years in the G League, never averaged over 10 points a game in a season,
Wow.
never. But he is, I mean, my opinion, a top 5 perimeter defender in the G League, right? Stuff that doesn't really show up in the box score because
For
that's
sure.
not always blocks and steals. A lot of that is just like playing good physical sound defense over the course of an entire shot clock, right? And
Yeah.
he does that game in and game out. And so guys like him who, otherwise probably wouldn't have gotten the opportunity, have gotten an opportunity and can forever call themselves an NBA player. So I'd rather see guys like that get called up than the old NBA player looking for another shot. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
But yeah, definitely. Do you feel like in that same breath though that because some of these because they carry some of that star power, these NBA vets, and then they join a team, that other guys look around it like, oh, this is an opportunity for me to show out because they're going to be looking at guys like a Gerald Green or a Mario Chalmers. Like it gives them like more of that exposure or spotlight because scouts might be looking at somebody else on that team. Like, do you feel like that benefits them in any way?
Yeah, I do. I do for sure. But it's a little bit of a
Not as
double-edged
much.
sword because
Yeah.
it's like the scouts are now watching the team, right? But at the
Mhm.
same time, that player might be hogging their minutes, So
Oh,
like
that's a good point.
that's the only negative is like, yeah, it's like, okay, now maybe scouts from all 30 NBA teams are watching the Vipers play, right? But a young guy or a vet who's been in the G League for 3 or 4 years might be thinking to themselves, man, yeah, they're all watching, but now Gerald is getting those 30 minutes, and now my minutes are getting cut from 25 to maybe 12, right? So
Yeah.
that's the only negative side to that.
Sometimes I think that's why the big three is a good option as well, just in terms of more exposure. And as the league continues to grow, maybe it's even a better option. But it just gives guys a little bit more opportunity that might need a little bit more of the limelight.
Right.
Guys in the G League maybe that aren't showcased as much, aren't as getting as many minutes. It's kind of an 8 to 10 game showcase to put on, and I feel like maybe it's a better spot in the G League, or maybe it is that 10-day call up into the NBA or a tryout in the preseason that could benefit them. And that's why I like the tie between the G League and the Big Three
Yeah, I agree. And tell you the truth, I think any stuff like that is great exposure, whether it's
or the
the Big
TBL or the
Three,
tournament.
TBT, yeah, all of that. Even look at Kiefer Sykes, right?
Yeah.
Kiefer Sykes played this year in the summer with Boeheim's Army, hit the $1 million shot, played well the entire tournament, gets a exhibit 10 with the Pacers, right? Didn't make the team right away and ends up going to Fort Wayne, leads the league in assists during the showcase tournament. Then gets called up because of the hardship. He gets called up to the Indiana Pacers, balls out. They sign him for the rest of the season. This is a guy, I remember when he got the Exhibit 10 with the Pacers, I was like, he's probably going to end up in the G League, right? I'm
Uh-huh.
curious to see what he does in the G League. And I was like, if he plays anyway like he did in TBT, there's a shot for him waiting in the NBA somehow. Now, I did not expect 100+ players to get that call up, right? But he was playing so well this season, anyways. He was averaging like 18 and 8 assists a game. He was playing so well, anyways, that I was like, even if this wasn't a crazy season with all these call ups, he would have probably still gotten a chance, whether it was a 10-day, or something like that. Just any opportunity in the league at some point in the year, probably at the end of the year, because of how well he
Yeah.
played.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's had after hitting that shot, and then he's got the cool story of getting the call right after hitting that
Yep.
shot. Like he's had
Right.
a pretty phenomenal 2021, 2022 season. So cool
He
to
did.
see.
He is. Yeah.
Cool to see that he's balling. I'll tell you one guy that you've really put me on to. I think his name is Emmanuel Terry, who got a chance to
Yes.
play with Phoenix, has been playing in Stockton. But I've really liked just like watching a lot more of him, or like watching Stockton King games, because he's like I forgot what you nicknamed him on the G League TV page, or what the guys that run it a little bit more now named him, but it's like the Hustle King, or
Oh, he's the Energy King.
Energy King. That's right.
Energy King, yeah.
It's been cool to see him play. Like, so like, it's just guys like that you really appreciate, like seeing get that opportunity and just
For
more in
sure.
that spotlight.
Anthony, I'm glad you brought up Emmanuel Terry. Yesterday, he drops 26 points and 15 rebounds. The Stockton Kings were down 29 points, right? 29 points
Uh-huh.
in the second half to the Texas Legends. In the fourth quarter, led by Emmanuel, they outscored him 36-7 and came back from 29
Wow.
points and won. And Emmanuel Terry was the number one reason why they came back and won. And he's a guy that he got his 10-day this year with Phoenix, and he was with Phoenix a couple years ago
Mm-hmm.
before for a little bit. And this is his third year in the G League. He's a guy that runs up and down the court like his life depends on it, right? There's some guys that just play with an insane motor, right? That you think that
Yeah.
this is you would look at him playing being like, he plays like it's his actual last game. A lot of people say that, right? A lot of people say, I play every game like it's my last. And then you see them
Uh-huh.
jogging up and down the court. That is not Emmanuel Terry. This guy, I think when he goes to the bench, he needs like one of those
Like a
things on the air.
respirator.
Yeah, something, because he just runs and plays so hard. They said Westbrook needed one of those one time because when he runs up and down, this guy is really going 120 miles an hour, right? And it's
Yeah.
the same with Terry, but the 6'10 version.
Man, that's so cool. That's like some 2K stats right there to have a 36-7 quarter. Like, that's
Yeah,
insane. But
that is.
that's like, and that's like one of the things you talk about that don't jump on the stat sheet necessarily, like that hustle and motor to be able to like run up and down the floor and like just do the little things, I feel like. And I feel like it certainly paid off for him, and hopefully he continues to get another opportunity.
Right. And I think about Isaiah Briscoe the same way, right?
Briscoe is like I think the G League TV page put it perfectly, a hard, rugged player, like
Yeah.
just like a great perimeter defender, like just tough as nails. Like, and he fit in so nicely with the big three, I think, because of that style of play he has.
Yeah, I wish I watched more of him in the big three, but watching him the last 2 years with Iowa and then the year before a little bit when he played for the Lakeland Magic, he's got that New Jersey grit, right? Where he's just
Mm-hmm.
unbelievably physical. Everything is in the paint. He is shooting more threes now, and he's shooting at a much higher clip than he was the last few years, because that's always been kind of the the thing about him that's probably keeping him from
Yeah.
the NBA is his lack of perimeter shooting. He's shooting it at a much better pace right now, which shows that he's been working on it. But if there's a guard that can get to the rim based on just sheer physicality and taking contact and finishing through contact, he's probably one of the top 2 or 3 guards in the league at doing that.
Well, I was gonna say he just came off fourth man of the year, won a Big Three championship with Trilogy, and I was gonna say I think what I liked is that I felt like maybe in the Big Three he could be himself a little bit more, try new things a little bit more. He shot a ton of threes throughout the Big Three season. The first game he ever played, he dropped 28 points. He dropped like 4 or 5 threes, which I
Oh,
feel
wow.
like
Okay.
you said, was like kind of his Achilles heel.
Right.
So yeah, like I think down the stretch it was a little bit more to the Jared Jack show, just because he was having such an incredible season. But one of the most valuable players off the bench throughout the season was Isaiah Briscoe. And I'm glad that he's shooting like a lot better. Like, I feel like I'm glad that he's a little bit more confident shooting his threes. And I'm hoping that the Big Three and playing in that, like for 10-game stretch, like helped him a little bit more, feel confident shooting that in like an actual game setting.
Right.
Uh,
Right. Well,
uh,
speaking of Jared, oh, Anthony, speaking of Jared Jack, real quick, he's an assistant now with Phoenix, and
uh-huh.
I was confident that they were going to give him a 10-day,
I
right?
was, I was fingers crossed that was going to
Yeah,
happen.
I was so confident because last year when he played for Ignite, of course, like I said, they're looking to develop Dacian Nix more than they're looking to
For sure.
play Jared Jack, right? Dacian Nix is the future. And so, Dacian Nix, Jalen Green, Jonathan Kuminga, they're going to have the ball as opposed to Jarrett, so his numbers weren't great, but he still looked fantastic. And then
Yeah.
he played the big three, looked fantastic. A guy like him, I know, can still hoop at a high level and probably still wants to hoop. I was shocked that they didn't give him a 10-day. I was really hoping for it, just like you, but probably a better situation for one of these young guys to get it as opposed to him. He's probably like, you know what?
Yeah.
I've played all the NBA I can play, even though that'd be cool to suit up again. Let's give a guy who's never gotten a shot. Let's give him an opportunity.
Yeah, he just won a title as well and was named co-rookie of the year in the Big Three alongside Kevin Murphy, who I kind of just want to reflect back on because I know that the last time we had a conversation or last time you were on the show, it was during that Big Three draft.
Yep.
And two guys that are in the G League now that you talked about a little bit more when they were drafted was Earl Clark when he was drafted number 2 to Tri-State, and then Kevin Murphy, who was drafted number 7 to Three-Headed Monsters, who both had phenomenal seasons. They were both played in the playoffs. Like I mentioned, Kevin Murphy was co-rookie of the year. But I feel like I wish I would have like listened in on like your description of them so much because of just like how they transition, or I feel like those are a couple guys that you don't get to hear about a lot from like a prominent perspectives, and that really showed out in the Big Three and are now kind of getting the opportunities in the G League. But I guess my question is like, do you feel like there could, like, looking at that scenario, do you feel like there's potentially a benefit of going the Big Three and then back to the G League first, maybe for some of these younger guys, as the Big Three has gotten a little bit younger and lower the age limit to 22?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a benefit. I wonder, tell you the truth, I'm not 100% sure. I'm
Okay.
not sure at all, but I wonder if playing in the Big Three and playing so well and getting that call up, that call out by Jared Jack on the podium. He said Kevin Murphy deserves to be on the NBA roster. I wonder
Yeah.
if that somehow led him to play for Ignite. You know,
I thought he
um,
was going to get an opportunity, and I thought maybe that's why he played with Ignite, because he was like,
yeah, it's
potentially really
interesting.
close.
Yeah, it's interesting because when Kevin Murphy was with Idaho and then he was with the Grand Rapids back when they were the Drive,
Mm-hmm.
he was a guy that was getting 23, 24 points a game a night. He was one of the leading scorers in the G League, and he was a guy that could always get buckets. He's a little bit more seasoned now. I think he's pushing 30, but
Yeah.
him joining Ignite was interesting because I looked at him as a guy who could probably come back to the G League on playing any other team, right? And probably get close to 20, if not 20 a game. And we've seen that in spurts this year with Ignite. He's not going to get all the touches, he's not going to get all the minutes, right? But every once in a while he shows out with a 12, 15, 18-point game and shows
Mm-hmm.
like I can still do this, right? So a guy like him, I think, could have actually earned himself a call up, depending on what team he was this year, based on how well he plays and how good of a scorer he still is. But the Ignite route is different because you're looking to be more of a mentor than anything,
Yeah.
right? And teach these guys the way. And so he's not
That,
as old as Amir Johnson, Jared Jack, but he does have a lot of experience, whether that's in the G League, playing overseas, and I think that's beneficial to these young guys. And plus, you do get a lot more money playing for Ignite than you would playing for the average G League team, because the average G League salary is 37,500. Out of Ignite, I know for a fact he's getting 6 figures.
that's pretty cool. That could definitely be a motivating factor. So I had the opportunity to sit down with him in Vegas like during week 2. This is just after they played Trilogy, and he was like pretty much going head to head with Isaiah Briscoe. So that was a pretty interesting matchup as well. But yeah, that was a big thing for him to like come back and play in the States. Like it was going to be have to work this time, because he talked a lot about like the mental aspect being important. Like it's like you have to have like that drive and like mentally know like, hey, I might not get the call up now, but I got to keep pushing through so that I can hopefully get
Right,
that call up. And
right.
I thought that was interesting on his part. So, I mean, maybe necessarily not make the league, but if you're making a lot of money and like you're doing what you love, like that's a great, motivation factor as well too.
For
I didn't
sure.
realize how much more you were getting paid to play with Ignite. Like I knew the young guys were, but I didn't know it was everybody.
Yeah, the veterans are getting much more too. And
That's
so
pretty
they
cool.
definitely incentivize them because I think with Ignite, it is a full-time job in the sense where you're playing ball, but your role of a mentor, right, takes a lot of time too. You're spending time with these
Mm-hmm.
guys off the court, you're teaching them the ropes. You know, you should do that on any team, right? If you're the veteran, on any
Yeah.
team, if you're a guy who's been around for 10 plus years, you probably should take these young guys under your wing. But you're not actually obligated to. I think on Ignite, you're more obligated to do so, and
Mhm.
that's your role coming in.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, cool that he's doing that. Cool that he's getting that opportunity. He's been really good, and Earl Clark was really good too. I don't know what happened with him in Sioux Falls. I thought he was getting an opportunity there, but I don't know if he's been injured or what. Maybe you can enlighten me on the status a little bit more.
Yeah, I tell you the truth, I don't know what the situation was with Earl Clark. He just didn't really play that much, and I think he was thinking it. Like I said, it's weird because Sioux Falls is trying to develop Micah Potter before they're trying to develop him, right?
Right.
And so even Trey Morning. Trey Morning at this point in time in his career might be even a better option, if not the same level of production as an Earl Clark, right? And so they're thinking themselves, we got these two young studs down low. Earl Clark can help, but I don't think he really fit in. There was nowhere for him to really shine on that team. And so, plus Trey Morning, his dad is Alonzo, right? So
Yeah, well, that
the
helps.
Skyforce of the Heat's G League team. So it's like, you're not going to bench my boy, for an old seasoned veteran. So I don't think there was much of an opportunity for him there. And I hope he can land somewhere else
Yeah,
that he can, because you're right. With the big three this year, he did shine. And so I would love to see what he can still offer. And then plus, when he was with the NBA, there was a lot of times where it was like, oh my God, Earl Clark can play, especially when he was on the Lakers a few years ago. I remember when Mike D'Antoni was the coach, and he started playing Earl Clark. I think it was like when Antoine Jameson went down, and Earl Clark stepped in, had a couple double doubles, and he was like, I can't believe I had this guy on my bench the entire time and didn't know what he could produce. Now it didn't last forever, right? Earl Clark kind of came back down to earth and was having a 10-point, 8 rebound game here and there, but mostly was like just you know side contributions mostly. But he can still play, and I think that it just depends, like I said before, on the situation, on the team.
yeah,
Who are these guys are getting called up? Who are these guys that are trying to develop first? And a lot of that plays into why Earl didn't get much of an opportunity.
sure, makes sense. Hopefully, he gets the opportunity. Maybe it just takes another season of the Big Three to show out and really, prove that like that he'd be a good scoring punch off the bench, whether it's for a G League team or an NBA team.
Right.
Um, I've appreciated the time so far. I want to end it here. So I want to ask you if you can name two players that you think would benefit that are playing the G League right now that you think would benefit from getting more exposure in the Big Three. And I'm going to give you two of mine. I want to hear your thoughts on it. But give me two players that you feel like could benefit from more exposure that are currently playing in the Big Three right now? It could be a young guy, it could be an older guy, but just not anybody that's played in the Big Three so far.
Ooh, that's a great question. That is a great question. I think the veteran that gets overlooked the most in the G League is David Stockton. And he's the guy
Oh,
that has played in the NBA before, right? Like, he played for the Jazz for a little bit and the Kings for a little bit. So he's gotten a couple of 10 days. But it's been, I think the Jazz one was like in 2017. So it's been 4 or 5 years since he's been in the league. And he wasn't, when he was in the league, it didn't last very long to begin with. But every year he comes to the G League and is almost, essentially an 18.8 assist, 9 assist type of player. And he just gets overlooked. I don't know if that's because of who his dad is or the fact that he's kind of small and doesn't really look the part of a basketball player. Kind of like his dad. I mean, if you saw us down the street, would you think that he's one of the all-time great, hoopers of all time, right?
hey, we've heard that
But
story. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
that
So
one lady didn't know when they were all on the Team USA team. So
yeah, exactly. So I look at Dave and I'm like, this year, if there was one veteran that I was certain would get called up, but of course didn't, it was David Stockton. So I don't know if necessarily he needs the big three for more exposure, but maybe he does. Maybe he goes to the big three, balls out, wins a championship, maybe wins MVP. Who knows, right? And
uh-huh.
then he's back on the radars. But I just can't believe a guy like him, as well as he's played this year, didn't get the call up. So I was like, what does he need to do? Whether it's TBT, does he need to go to summer league again, even as a veteran? Does he need maybe the big three? Whatever the case may be, I think that there's an opportunity for him in the NBA, and if it's using the big three to do it, then that probably work out for him, hopefully. But
Yeah.
other than David Stockton, I'm trying to think of
And it's weird
good
too. I was gonna
vets.
say, you mentioned the
Yeah,
TBT. I feel like it's been like you're either a TBT guy, you're a Big Three guy, and then
yeah,
there's like the
yeah.
occasional like I play in both. Like Dante Green is very much the guy like I'll play in both. I think he did when the Big Three is off. So that's been an interesting like dynamic too. But I feel like they're almost like both. I don't want to say feeder leagues for the G League or the NBA, but they're definitely like alternative options that are pretty strong for G League teams to consider. I feel like guys coming out of those two leagues. But
Yeah.
anyways, that's just kind of a sidebar there. Another player you have, and I guess I wanted to say, mind you, like Isaiah Briscoe has been the youngest guy to play in the Big Three so far. So with that in mind, I don't know if anybody else sticks out.
Oh, I didn't realize Briscoe was the youngest.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So David Stockton for sure. I think another guy, and he's not really all that well known, but there's a guy named Rashad James. Have you heard of him? He's on the Birmingham Squadron.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, Rashad James is actually a former D2 guy, and he's been in the G League since about 2015 or so. Hasn't been in the G League straight since 2015. He's played overseas as well, but he's one of the, he's in his 30s now, if not probably around 30 years old. He's one of the highest flying guards in the G League, and so even
Hmm.
at his age, and he's a guy that's kind of bounced around teams. He's been in the slam dunk contest before. He's a guy like who most people wouldn't know about, and I don't at this point I don't know if he's on any NBA radars. But he's the same like Briscoe, an extremely physical guard, right? That I think would thrive in the Big Three game. Shoots the three ball pretty well. Will explode at the basket if he's given an open lane, right? But a guy like him, I've been kind of really advocating for to get a chance in the league,
Mhm.
and I would love to see him utilize whether it's the big three or maybe if it's TBT, just something to help him get more of an exposure. Because I do think that all it takes, and I always say this for any opportunity, all it takes is for just one guy or one team to be like, this guy can hoop, right? This guy can
Yeah.
hoop. Let's give him an exhibit 10 and test him out in training camp, see what he's got, right? And then from there, at least you had an opportunity to prove yourself, whether it goes well or doesn't, right?
Yeah.
And, so the thing is, in the summer, a lot of these guys are just not on people's minds, right? A lot of these old
Because they
vets.
have all these like new guys coming in, and you have guys that have
Exactly.
played on the team in the
Exactly.
past.
Right. So whatever you can do to keep yourself in the public eye is certainly a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I actually, when Isaiah Thomas wasn't playing, I don't think the big three would have been a bad option for him.
He did not. He did not agree with that.
I know. You told me about that last time I was on the show. Is that he felt a certain way about that, and I understand. Listen, it was only 2017 that this guy was a star, right?
Yeah.
So he's probably thinking, the big three is for Jermaine O'Neal, who's 40 years old, and I'm trying to think, Katino Mobley, who's how old, like 40 something, right?
45 or something, and
45, right,
somehow
right,
makes
and
it back
so.
every year.
Right. And say the truth, that's why with the big three, I think there's a stigma around the big three. Everyone's 40 years old and has a belly right now, right? It's like, and that's not the case, right? There's a lot of maybe some stereotypes that aren't true that he could probably dispel if he played in the big three. But I have a feeling that he thought of the big three as like just that, what I said. All these guys are 40 plus. They have beer bellies. They've been out of the league for 5, 6, 7 years, right? You know what I mean? So it's kind of like he would take that as like an insult. He's above that to an extent, which I can see why he'd think that. But it's more about, and I think the same thing about the G League. I know I'm going a little bit off topic, but
No, you're
a few,
good.
a few years in the G League, a few years ago in the G League, people thought the same thing. Like, no, I'm not going to the G League. Like, if I go to the G League, they're automatically going to characterize me as washed up, right? And
Mhm.
it took, 7 years or so, because I remember when I first started following the G in 2015, people definitely thought that, right? So it's taken 6, 7 years for players and the public to really kind of realize, listen, these are legitimate players in a legitimate league, and you can utilize this to help get you to your ultimate goal. I think in a few years they will think of the big three that way, right? It's going to take a little
Yeah.
while because they're still so young.
No, I completely agree, and I think those are good ways to look at it. I think it's reasons like guys like Isaiah Briscoe playing in the league, having a lot of success, uh, is one why I think helps the league a lot, but I think two, like why I want him to get to the NBA so bad, so that you can talk about that route a little bit more and what it took
Right.
to get back into the NBA. So hopefully that's the case. I really advocate for a lot of young guys. I've even asked like old like high school like colleagues of mine, like that play overseas, like you should maybe think about the big three, just because I feel like it'd be interesting to see a lot of young guys. And with that being said, like a couple guys that I've always had in mind, this guy's a little bit older, but playing in the G right now. And I've actually thought about him as a big three option for a little while, but like I think, like I always thought like Brandon Knight would be a cool option to play in the big three. A
Okay.
longtime NBA guy. I know that he's playing for Sioux Falls right now. I'm not sure how he's doing. I think last time I checked, he was doing pretty good.
Yeah.
But I always thought he'd be an interesting option in the big three. And then the other guy who I've always like just been like I've just always been intrigued by, who also plays for Birmingham, is Joe Young. Like
Oh,
I
Joe
would
Young.
love to see
Yes.
Joe Young get more exposure. It's like he went from like being really good at Oregon, getting on a commercial with Paul George, and then I didn't hear from him at all. And then he joined the squadron. I'm like, this dude is still killing it. Why is he not getting another opportunity?
Yeah, Joe. See, that's a great one, Joe Young. I should have. So Rashad James, the guy that I mentioned, is his
Uh-huh.
teammate, right?
Right,
And
right.
the reason why I said Rashad was because Rashad hasn't gotten to the league yet, and so I would
Yeah,
like
yeah,
him to
yeah.
utilize the big three to get to the league. Joe Young's perfect because Joe Young was with the Pacers. He's Paul George's cousin.
Oh, that makes sense why they were on the commercial together. I
Yeah,
thought he
yeah,
just
that's why
I
he was
thought
in
Paul George
Decatur
just liked
with
him.
him. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So he's Paul George's cousin,
Or that was like his
and
rookie or something.
yeah, yeah. And so, he played a couple years in Indiana. He actually had a couple stints in Fort Wayne as well back when it was the D League, and then went over to China and was getting near 40 point, 40 points per game in China for multiple seasons. And I read an article, they had a Slam article about him not that long ago, and he was talking about how this is like his ultimate dream of getting back to the league. Because a lot of times, so what happens, what he said happened to him was he came in the league very confident, very brash, and he got labeled as immature, right? He got
Hmm.
labeled as a bit of a headache, And
Hmm.
at the time, he was 21, 22 years old, still a kid, right? And it's been, 6, 7, 8 years since then, right? He's had a family. He's married now. He's had to grind overseas, right? He's had to play in the D League. Um, and this is all coming full circle now because he's coming back to the G League, to the squadron, in hopes of earning another shot, trying to prove to people that he is a much more mature person than he was back then. I think that's maybe the one thing that's holding him back, is that they look at the old Joe Young from like 2014 and maybe how he acted, or
Which
maybe
is
how he
crazy.
handled
He's
certain
21. Of
situations. Yeah,
course he's immature. We were all immature at
exactly, exactly.
21.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, for him, he can certainly still play, and he's had 40-point games this year. He's had multiple 30-point games. I mean, he still has shown that he can score at an elite level. He started off the season kind of slow, but then once he hit his groove, was absolutely balling. He's another guy that I think by the end of the year we will see in an NBA uniform, even if it's only for 10
Ooh,
days, right? I
I
think he's
hope so.
playing too well, and the Pelicans suck too much for him not to get a call up to some degree, just to say thank you for what you're doing for our G League team. A lot of times teams will do that, right? They'll be
Yeah.
like, you know what? We didn't have an opportunity to call you up during the middle of the season. It's the end of the season right now. We want to just thank you for grinding it out with us. You know what I mean? Here's an extra 45,000 or whatever you'd make for the 10-day contract. We'll give you 10 days just as a thank you. Get a couple buckets, you know what I mean? So I hope
Yeah.
they do that for Joe because he deserves it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's great. And I think that that's an interesting point that like people get labeled immature so early on in their career, like
Yeah,
being
yeah.
21. It's like, of course, some of these guys literally just came out of high school like 2 years ago, if you really want to put it in perspective. So it's
Yeah,
just
exactly.
it's
And
just wild.
that's why I always think about, guys who are in the G League and they might be, 19, 20, 21 years old, and they were NBA first rounders or second rounders, they haven't panned out yet. I'm like, give these guys a couple years to develop. But the thing about sports is that it's like a what
Yeah,
have you done for me recently type of league, type of
definitely.
business. And then it's you get your one shot, and then if you screw up on that one shot, you might not get another, right? So it's a very cutthroat type of unforgiving league, and unfortunately Joe has been on the wrong side of that. It's just been 7 years, 8 years since then, right? So I would love for just one team to be like, you know what, whatever happened in 2015 with the Pacers, let's just wipe that, or let's start with a
Hmm.
clean slate and let's start brand new, because you say you're a new person, just prove it to us, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so, and in that Slam article, everyone talked about who works for the Birmingham Squadron, talked about how he's been just class personified. So I really do hope he gets another shot.
Yeah, that's one story I'm definitely following. But now I got Rashad James to also look out too. So maybe I watch some more Birmingham Squadron games. And hey, if
Yep.
the NBA doesn't, maybe call them up, or this isn't the year, maybe they get a little more exposure this summer in the Big Three. I think it'd be cool. Maybe they team back up or play against each other. We'll see how that goes. But just want to say thank you. I know this is a little bit, like you said, off script. It wasn't necessarily all about the Big Three necessarily, but I like having the conversation about just guys that I guess don't get talked about as much from a high level perspective. And I like just to have the conversation about guys that are really grinding to get to where they're going, whether it's in the G League or the Big Three or not. So really appreciate the conversation, and just coming back on the show. Like I said, you're the most decorated fourth man guest out there right now. This is
I
being your
appreciate
third
that,
time.
Anthony, man.
So
I appreciate that, dude. Thanks for having me on again. And as the season progresses, it's going to be cool to keep up with you and like seeing which guys eventually do come to the Big Three. Because I know that next summer we're going to have a few names. Where I'm going to be like, oh, we talked about him on the show back in January. Oh, I'm sorry, back in February. So
yeah.
I bet you there's going to be a couple names. I wouldn't be surprised if even Isaiah Briscoe comes back for a second time, try to defend what he did last year. You said he won Rookie of the Year, right?
He won fourth man of the year. He
Oh,
won a
fourth man
chip,
of the year.
which
Okay,
means you
yeah.
get to keep your squad together. So Trilogy will come back as long as they all want to come back.
Yeah.
You know, we'll see. That's kind of an interesting team with Jared Jack being a coach and Amir playing, you know, being kind of a mentor for the
Yeah,
Ignite and Briscoe playing in the G League. So we'll see how that team comes back, if they all come back and defend what's theirs. But yeah, we'll definitely have you on the show again, whether it's for the draft or following the draft. We'll definitely have you back on. We'll talk more about it.
for sure. Sounds good.
Cool. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony.
All right, that was our interview with Jeff Kee from the G League and G League TV. He is always just a great conversation to have, just someone who really not just knows basketball, but really just knows a lot of hoopers in general. I feel like just a lot of guys that maybe aren't known on a higher scale. I really like that he always showcases and highlights guys that can really ball out. They just don't have a lot of attention and just need a little bit more exposure. So always a great conversation. Appreciate the time as always, Jeff, and definitely will be back on the show here at some point, especially as we get closer to the draft. Again, everyone who tuned in today, we really appreciate. Just want to remind you guys to follow on social media at Fourth Man Pod, Instagram and Twitter. Instagram, the more important aspect if you're in the highlights and want to be up to date on Big Three offseason news as we continue to gear up toward that June 18th date. Again, if you want to watch the show on YouTube, it's youtube.com/fourthmanpod and Dash Radio, Nothing But Net channel. We appreciate you guys as always, and we appreciate our listeners that tune in for their Big Three updates as well. Thanks again to Jeff, and we will see you guys next time.